Hello and welcome to a new series I'm putting together called Building a Scene. This is episode 1 on the yard office, part 1. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. KRP Models here. Well, in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how I work on my yard and yard office. So basically I'm going to be upgrading this crossing here, putting a new crossing here, and paving this whole area. I'm going to be putting in some lights in the yard and repairing a light in the yard office and lots of other little details. So I'd just like to take you guys along with me, show you how I do it, and I hope you enjoy. Let's go ahead and get started. I first begin by demoing an old section of road I poured previously in order to make way for new forms so I can span the distance between the two rails and further down to the yard office, just using a flathead screwdriver and a hobby knife. Next, using a chisel, I carve a nice straight line to make way for some foam tape, keeping it clean as I go along. Next, I carve out some of the road bed to make way for the forms. Using a straight edge, I take a measurement of the top of the rail head and cut out some balsa wood strips to act as the forms, carving as I go, making sure everything fits nice and snug. I go ahead and take some push pins and anchor those down to the plywood. And once everything looks good, I go ahead and lock it in with some glue all, making sure to glue on the outside. And continue that with the rest of the forms, carving a nice gradient down to where it's going to meet up with the foam tape. Next, using a straight edge, I draw a nice straight line and start laying out some foam tape, working my way around. Once that's done, I take some cork road bed and start gluing that into the thicker sections of the forms. This is going to do two things. It's going to help the plaster dry a lot quicker, and it's also going to save a little bit of plaster. And once that's done, I begin masking off the areas where I don't want to get any plaster, including the center of the track. And following the instructions on the side of the package of the Woodland Scenic Smooth It, I go ahead and mix some of that up and begin pouring it out. Using a nice straight piece of styrene, I begin working the plaster in between the forms, going back and forth. Just taking my time, making sure it looks good, and filling in any low areas that I need to. So this was kind of a lengthy process, and I did cut a lot of it out. But as you can see, it's taking shape. Just going back and forth, making sure everything looks right. And once they did, I went ahead and filled in the little area across the way there. So I let the plaster dry 15 to 20 minutes before removing the masking tape. Doing this while it's still wet makes for a lot easier ease of cleanup. So I go around and just remove all the different masking tape and using a hobby knife to cut it off. As you can see here, I'm trying to save as many pieces as I can in my hand and throw it away. Try not to make a huge mess. But all in all, everything's looking very good. Very pleased with the results. And use a brush to clean up the bigger chunks.
Next, I begin removing the foam tape and the balsa wood forms. Now once the plaster is poured, it wettens the balsa wood and the glue wall. So removing is pretty simple. Just use a hobby knife and work it a little bit. Cut that glue all away and poke it with your hobby knife and it'll come right out. So this is pretty simple. I think it's a great idea and it works well. So once all the forms are removed, I go ahead and mask off the area again, this time with some paper towels just to do some dust control, and take a 220 sanding block and go ahead and sand it nice and smooth. But let's move away from that for a few minutes and concentrate on these N-scale concrete BLMA gray crossings I got. And I go ahead and cut them out of the spurs and sand the edges down so they're nice and smooth. And go ahead and mount them on some blue painter's tape and give them a nice gray shade of concrete color using some spray paint. Next, using the same color I used to paint my rails with, I go ahead and paint the edges, being very careful to get a nice straight line following that raised edge. Just taking my time. And kind of using a capillary effect in here in the middle. Again, using the edges as a guide. Now with all the pieces painted and dried, I begin cutting out some styrene strips. These are some 060 square rod. These are for the middle sections. And some 040 strip for the outside sections. Now mind you, this is only working for Code 80 Atlas track. With the pieces cut out, I begin painting them flat black. Once I have all the pieces painted flat black, I take the crossing, flip it over, and dab out some glue. And I go ahead and take the 060 square rod, making sure the black side is facing downwards, and glue it over the D-ring holes or lift holes, making sure it's nice and parallel and flat. And that way when you glue it down in the middle of your track, it's going to sit just below the top of the railhead, allowing for your rolling stock and locomotives to roll over freely. And I'll go ahead and put some weight on it just to keep it nice and flat. So next I take the outer crossing sections. In the same process, I go ahead and dab some glue out. This time I'm gluing the crossing itself down on top of the styrene strip. And go ahead and line it up, making sure everything's nice and parallel. And it's looking good. So the next step, I go ahead and start painting the ties and the rails at each crossing. Using a hobby knife and a flathead screwdriver, I begin carving out the plaster for the crossing to sit in. I'll basically do this for all the outside sections. And I go ahead and test fit this one, and wasn't very happy with the straightness of the line or the elevation. So I took some spackle and went over the area one more time, making the spot where the road meets the rail nice and flat. That way the crossing is going to sit in there nice and flat and it's going to look very prototypical. And I'll go ahead and do the other side also. So off camera I went ahead and recarved these and retest fit the pieces, and I was happy with the result. So next I go ahead and take the fast drying spackle that I got that goes on pink and dries white. I take care of the little bubble holes that are in the larger section of the yard here. And once that was dry, I went ahead and gave it a little bit of a sanding. As you can see here, I got the crossing pieces test fitted. Before I do any painting, I take a brush and give the area a nice vacuuming. And I take some rain gray and sand dune colored acrylic paint. So once I got the paint mixed up, I begin painting, doing my best to keep the streaks down to a minimum. And I'll go ahead and do this area with 2 coats, allowing a good hour or so to dry in between. So once the paint's all dry, I'm ready to glue down the crossings. But first I test fit the center section, and once satisfied, I take some Model Masters liquid cement and glue the center section down. Next, I'm ready to glue the outside sections of crossing, but before I do that, I take some 060 square rod and glue that down right on top of the ties, parallel with the rail spike. I used 060 square rod for the center section, so by doing this, I'm making the outside sections level with the inside. And what I want here is a nice press fit. Next, I glue down the other side. Now this one took a little more persuading as the first one, but as you can see, fits in there nice and snug. Now before everything dries, I make sure and go ahead and do a roll test, making sure we have enough clearance, and it looks like we do. So that's going to wrap up part 1 of this episode in this new series, Building a Scene. Make sure and stay tuned for part 2, where I'll continue more detail on the road and parking lot, also adding lights in the yard office and lots of other details. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching.